Well, the NFL Combine is underway this weekend in Indianapolis. A big part of the offseason, the big first dropping of the offseason that we'll see as we build up towards April's draft. We've got March's free agency coming up, but the first milestone of the NFL offseason is the NFL Combine coming up this week. All the workouts get underway on Thursday, but GMs and coaches, more importantly, to the start of the show today, they talk tomorrow, especially Kwesi Adofo-Mensah and Kevin O'Connell. They'll talk to the media tomorrow. We know that at the Combine, it's kind of everybody from the NFL world gets there. They communicate. The agents start talking to teams about what to expect when it comes to free agency. So what are the big news and note items that we should expect to hear out of the Combine coming this week? I know we've got Sam Darnold's situation, the quarterback situation for the Vikings. Kwesi Adofo-Mensah still hasn't had a contract extension announced, and that's kind of peculiar considering it's now Combine season and he's going into year 4, I believe, of his contract. That's the final year of his contract. So very interesting on that. What are the biggest news and notes you're keeping an eye out for this week?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot. We're recording this on Monday. It's 2 weeks out from the start of free agency, the start of the NFL's legal tampering period, which is really when all the deals start to pour in from Adam Schefter and Tom Pelissero and those guys. So it's only 2 weeks away, but this is the week in Indianapolis that's going to really set the stage for a lot of that to happen. A lot of those deals that get announced right when that window opens, they've been hammered out, and the framework has been discussed, whether in the halls of the Indiana Convention Center this week or late at night at St. Elmo's Steakhouse, a famous restaurant in Indy. That a lot of those conversations are going to happen, and one of the biggest kind of topics of discussion around the league, obviously for the Vikings, but I think for a lot of teams, is going to be Sam Darnold. And what does his market look like? Which teams are the most interested? Even if you're a team that isn't interested in Sam Darnold but has a need of some sort of quarterback, you're going to be curious about the Sam Darnold situation, and you're going to want to have those conversations because he's the biggest and then the first domino that seems likely to fall, whether he winds up back in Minnesota, which frankly I don't expect, whether if he lands with the Raiders or somehow ends up with the Rams if Matthew Stafford's gone, or the Titans or the Giants or whoever it might be. That's going to have kind of a ripple effect and ramifications for every other quarterback needy team. So it starts with Sam Darnold. We'll hear from Kevin O'Connell and Kwesi Adofo-Mensah on Tuesday. I don't know that we'll learn a lot from that. That'll probably be them doing their usual kind of dancing around questions, and I'm sure there'll be some interesting things that are said. But they're not going to come out and tell us anything. But the Sam Darnold one is a big one. And then you can go on to all the other big free agents, the Vikings internal ones, including Byron Murphy Jr., Cam Bynum, Aaron Jones, Daniel Jones. Didn't play a snap for the Vikings, but he's an interesting free agent this offseason as well, who might get a Sam Darnold type of contract from some team, whether that's the Vikings or somebody else. And then externally, who are the Vikings really going to make significant pushes for? Because this is a team with, I think they're 6th or 7th or something like that in cap space. So they're going to be able to go after some big names in free agency, and Kwesi and Rob Brzezinski and then the front office guys will be having those conversations with the agents of players like Trey Smith or Milton Williams or DJ Reed or whoever it might be this week. So a big week in the NFL. It's not necessarily like the week of news where we're going to learn a whole lot.
Yeah.
But it's the week that sets the stage for all the news that's going to come in a hurry in about 2 weeks.
So you mentioned the quarterback situation and Sam Darnold there, and the Rams. They got into this situation this weekend because it came out that they have allowed Matthew Stafford's agents to start seeking out a trade for Matthew Stafford, which obviously would put Sam Darnold in the crosshairs of the Rams if they are able to move Matthew Stafford out of Los Angeles. That seems like a very perfect fit considering they're essentially the same offenses. It wouldn't really be too much adjustment for him. It's a good situation in Los Angeles, probably the best one outside of Minnesota, you would imagine. So if you're Sam Darnold and his agent, you're looking for the best situation. It's either Minnesota or Los Angeles at this point. The Raiders may be able to splash the cash, but they are an organization that needs a lot of rebuilding. So I don't know that a 27-year-old quarterback coming off a career year, kind of reviving his career, wants to go into a situation where he's going to be relied on too much. how much do you expect the Rams to factor in on this, because they still do have to move Matthew Stafford, and that can be a bit of a hassle because of the contract he has on him. How much are we expecting Los Angeles to factor into the Sam Darnold situation now?
Yeah, it's a fascinating possibility for the reasons that you just mentioned. I mean, there wouldn't be outside of the Vikings, who have JJ McCarthy waiting in the wings, and probably my guess is aren't going to make Sam Darnold a market level offer. Outside of Minnesota, that would be the ideal landing spot because
Mm-hmm.
yeah, you'd be going into a very similar offense, a great head coach in Sean McVay. You've got well, maybe not Cooper Kupp, but you got Puka Nakua,
Yeah,
Kyron Williams. You've got weapons. Sam Darnold saw firsthand how good that defense is. That would be a kind of a funny subplot of it. Like, oh, hey guys, you sacked me 9 times in the wild card round. We're teammates now. That's
yeah.
cool. No,
I don't want
I
any
don't.
part of facing your defense anymore. I'm going to go join you guys.
Yeah, well, might have a difficult time in training camp then, but
Yeah.
yeah, it makes a lot of sense, kind of on paper, for the Rams, who just saw what Sam Darnold's capable of. Obviously, not necessarily in that final game, but the full year's body of work. It was really impressive. He fit the offense really well. And so from that perspective, it makes sense. But I'm also still kind of wondering, like, are they really going to move off of Matthew Stafford when that pairing of him and McVay has been so successful? And you think about it, they were really down to the wire against the Eagles in the divisional round. Like
Yeah.
they're close to a trip to the NFC title game. Um, are you going to move off of Stafford, or I've seen maybe some people speculating that Stafford and his agent will talk to other teams and gauge the market a little bit and see maybe what's out there, and then use that kind of as leverage to work out a new deal with the Rams. So I don't know exactly what's going to happen there, but you are right that it does make some sense. It is a very intriguing possibility. If Stafford does somehow end up elsewhere, which by the way I don't think would be in Minnesota, but that'd be
It's
kind of
always
funny
out there.
if that, I know it always is, if they just did a little trade or something. But no, I don't think that that's going to happen. But if he does land elsewhere, that you can bet that Sam Darnold and his agents would be very interested in talking to the Rams to see if something works out there.
The other thing that I mentioned there early on in the show, Kwesi Mensah, after the news came out that Kevin O'Connell had signed an extension, Adam Schefter tweeted out that the Vikings and Kwesi Mensah were working on an extension as well. But that still hasn't happened. It's been almost over a month, I believe, at this point, that still hasn't happened. Do you find that intriguing, or is it just kind of something that's out there that's being worked on? You imagine it's just negotiations, or do you think the ownership still does have some questions about Adolfo Mensa based on, I know it's not really fair because the drafts have gone pretty decently since this first draft, but there still are a lot of questions from the Vikings fan base on his ability to draft based solely on that first draft.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one because you've thought kind of since they arrived of Kevin O'Connell and Kwesi Adofo-Mensah as this package deal. They
Mm-hmm.
signed, I mean, well, Adofo-Mensah was hired a couple weeks earlier because O'Connell's team was in the Super Bowl, but
Yep.
they signed matching 4-year deals. They didn't get any sort of extensions after year two. And then O'Connell gets his, and now Adolfo-Mensah is still kind of waiting. And I think the reports where it's a 4-year extension for O'Connell, so he's under contract for 5 more. Um, I don't know that Adolfo-Mensah will get that kind of deal, just because I think the general consensus from fans, and I think it's fair to say, is that O'Connell has proven himself in his
Yeah.
role a little bit more than Adolfo-Mensah has, and they're pairing, and so a lot of that work is together. But um, O'Connell pretty clearly is the guy at head coach for the Vikings. I don't think there's a lot of debate about that, even for people who are going to point to the playoff record or things
Yeah.
like that, or the running game, whatever. Adolfo-Mensah, I think it has also done some very good things. I mean, this
Mm-hmm.
last year's free agent class really, I think, helped
Yeah.
his case, and may have helped get him the extension that I do still think is coming at some point. But yes, the draft has been a question mark. Obviously, the 2022 draft wasn't great. Jordan Addison was a hit in 2023. We'll see about Mekhi Blackman. They got Ivan Pace that year as a college
Right.
free agent, and then last year, I mean, we still don't really know what we're going to get out of JJ McCarthy or Dallas Turner, who showed some flashes as a rookie, but also just didn't play a whole lot. So yeah, there hasn't been a ton of landing proven contributors outside of Addison. But then again, are you willing to let him, a guy who's done a lot of other good things, go into the final year of his deal and potentially move on next year? I don't know. I still do think they get a deal done. Um, I don't know what they would be waiting for if
Right.
it's just like hammering out negotiations, details, things like that. Because you could wait. I think I saw somebody say like, "Oh, maybe they're going to wait until after the draft," but I don't know how that like proves anything because
Right.
if,
They got 4 draft
whichever
picks.
whichever players he drafts, you're not going to know if they're good or not in May. Like, oh, this guy looks good in OTAs. Now we can extend you. Like, that's not gonna be the decision making. So
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't have any updates on that front, but I do still think it's something that eventually gets done before next season.
Yeah, and you look at how he kept this team mostly competitive, or helped keep this team mostly competitive while fixing the cap situation
Yeah.
that was foisted upon him. I mean, it was a horrible cap situation that he came into and somehow was able, alongside Kevin O'Connell, to keep this team competitive, and now they head into the offseason with a boatload of money to spend in free agency, which they'll need because, as we said, they don't have a whole lot of draft picks, which gets us into the prospects coming up that will perform at the combine this weekend. Thursday, we've got defensive linemen and linebackers, which I know Vikings fans will probably key in on that one because of the defensive linemen. Friday, we've got defensive backs and tight ends, which defensive backs, another position that we could talk about. Quarterbacks, wide receivers, running backs on Saturday, and then Sunday is offensive linemen. Let's jump into this. Who are the prospects that Vikings fans should be keeping their eye on, and when can we see them do their workouts on at the combine this week?
Well, I'm glad you said that schedule. I don't have that in front of me, but let's go day by day there. Thursday, the defensive lineman.
Yeah.
This is a position that I am just kind of all in on in this year's draft. I think if you just told me the Vikings are going to stay at 24, or let's say trade down somewhere in the 27 to 40 range,
Mm-hmm.
which position are they? Do I want them to use their first pick on, kind of regardless of knowing who's available, knowing the exact prospects? I would say defensive tackle. It's something that they haven't done in the first round since Sharif Floyd in 2013. It's something that they have kind of seemingly not prioritized, both during the Mike Zimmer era and then at Donatel, Brian Flores. Like they've had these really good big run stuffing tackles. It was
Mm-hmm.
Linval Joseph under Zimmer, and then it was Dalvin Tomlinson, and now it's been Harrison Phillips. And those guys are really important for the defenses that they like to run, and stopping the run, occupying blocks, opening up gaps for the linebackers to flow downhill, doing things like that. That's very important, and I think Harrison Phillips is a very good player in that role. But they just need somebody who can get after the quarterback from the defensive tackle position. It is so important and impactful to be able to rush the passer from the interior. I mean, we saw that just really, really up close when you're watching that Vikings Rams game in the playoffs, and Kobe Turner and Braden Fiskey and Neville Gallimore and all these guys are getting through the Vikings' admittedly weak interior of the offensive line, which we'll also talk about, and getting to Sam Darnold and forcing him to not be able to step up in the pocket, and then you've got to try to bail outside of the pocket, and then if you also have good edge rushers like the Rams did with Jared Verse and Byron Young, and guess what? Like the Vikings have with Jonathan Grenard and Andrew Van Ginkel,
Mm-hmm.
it just can work really, really well to create a dynamic overall pass rush. The Vikings haven't had a kind of game-wrecking player like that since Kevin Williams' prime in the late 2000s. They've had a couple of guys, Tom Johnson and Sheldon Richardson at one point, but I would love to see them draft a defensive tackle who can rush the passer. That was my long-winded intro, and a couple of those guys. I think Walter Nolan out of Ole Miss is a former top recruit who went to Texas A&M, transferred to Ole Miss. He is a stud. He's still developing, certainly, but if he's available at 24, that's somebody who's really intriguing to me. There's kind of a lot of different like styles here. Nolan is more of like 290-pound true really athletic, three technique. Then you've got like Kenneth Grant from Michigan, who's 340 pounds, and yet still kind of works for what I'm talking about. He can still get after the passer. He's not going to be as much of that true three technique type of guy, but he is so athletic for a guy at 340 pounds that I think he would impact the pass rush as well as being a really disruptive run defender. And so Kenneth Grant is another one who I think people should keep an eye on. Derek Harmon out of Oregon, kind of a mixture of the two, where he's a good run defender. Also, I think first or second in total pressures among defensive tackles last year, can really get after the quarterback. There's a bunch of these guys. Those are three of the main names that I kind of look at in the first round, but you've got guys like Tyleik Williams out of Ohio State, who's more of a true run defender, very good run defender, still developing as a pass rusher. If they trade down, guys like TJ Sanders out of South Carolina. There's a bunch of intriguing dudes in this class. Darius Alexander out of Toledo had a really good Senior Bowl. And then, I mean, it's even deep if you wait on this position. But I think this is an area where the Vikings should really look to target in the first round or in the second round if they trade back.
Yeah, absolutely. Because the defensive linemen in free agency are going to rake in a lot of cash this offseason. So it's kind of picking which route you want to go, and we can talk about that a little bit later. But all right, moving on to Friday, defensive backs. Tight ends are also performing, but Vikings are kind of set there. Defensive backs, who should we focus on Friday?
Yeah, there's a bunch, and you kind of mentioned a relevant point here, which is what the Vikings do in the draft will be at least to some extent shaped by what they do in free agency, and you don't want to draft for need. You want to draft best player available, but if they sign two really good starting caliber defensive tackles, that probably drops a little bit below, let's say cornerback or running back or whatever. Whereas if you spend more money at cornerback in free agency, then maybe defensive tackle is a little higher. So we'll see what happens there. But broadly, these are the kind of positions of need that we're looking at. Defensive back, cornerback is another big one. We don't know what's going to happen with Byron Murphy. Stephon Gilmore is also a free agent. Shaq Griffin's also a free agent. Even Fabian Moreau is a free agent. We got Mekhi Blackman coming back, but there's a lot of uncertainty at that position. I don't think Will Johnson out of Michigan is going to be available for the Vikings. But you're talking about guys like Jahdae Barron out of Texas is a really versatile guy he's even drawn some kind of Brian Branch comparisons where you can play outside, you can play in the slot, you can line up in the box, do a lot of different things. I'm a big fan of him. Siobhan Revell Jr. is a corner out of East Carolina who tore his ACL last year, but still has done enough good things up to that point to potentially be a first-round pick. Azaria Thomas out of Florida State, Benjamin Morrison out of Notre Dame. It's a deep. Maxwell Hairston out of Kentucky is another Senior Bowl guy. This is a deep cornerback class. I know it seems kind of easy to say, but this really is, from what a lot of the draft experts are saying, a deep class at some positions of need for the Vikings, which I think is exciting, like defensive tackle, cornerback, running back specifically. Those three, there are a lot of guys to like in this year's class. So it'll be interesting to see how these guys test 40, bench press, shuttle, all these different things this week and what that maybe does for their stock. You can also keep an eye on some safeties for the Vikings as well. I don't know that that's something they're going to do in the first round, but if you've got a guy really high on your board, like let's say Georgia's Malachi Starks, Nick Amenwari out of South Carolina, there's some guys there. If Cam Bynum leaves, if Harrison Smith retires, that suddenly becomes a need, even though you've got Josh Metellus, you've got a guy like Theo Jackson. So yeah, defensive backs on Friday, that'll be definitely interesting to watch.
Do you just suggest to Vikings fans they should watch out for a Georgia safety in the draft? I don't think that worked out too well last time.
I know,
and there might be some PTSD for that one.
I know, I get it.
Yeah,
different
players, obviously.
I always say scout the player and not the helmet. Like when people are like, people for many years were like, oh, you can't draft an Ohio State quarterback. And
right.
CJ Stroud turned out pretty well, it seems. And I just think it's maybe there are times where like the scheme of a certain like back in the air raid days, if you had some quarterback
Yeah,
playing in a system like that, like at Houston, or although Case Keenum was pretty had a
Case
decent
Keenum
NFL
worked
career.
out.
Yeah, so you know what I'm saying though. Like
Yep.
maybe there's some examples like that, but broadly, look at the player, not the jersey they're wearing. Don't just because Lewis Cine did not turn out doesn't mean Malachi Starks isn't uh, doesn't have a chance to have a really good NFL career.
Hey, Lewis Dean's got a Super Bowl ring now. It doesn't matter to him.
He does have a Super Bowl ring. That is true. Eagles legend Lewis Cine.
All right, Saturday, quarterbacks, wide receivers. Vikings are pretty much set on those positions. Let's look at running backs. This one is, I know, a very deep class as well. As you mentioned, deep class in a bunch of positions the Vikings need. Running backs are plentiful in this draft. Who are the guys that the Vikings fans should keep an eye out for on Saturday?
Even more so than defensive tackles and cornerbacks, there are a million running backs in this class who are really good and really fun to watch, and are getting a lot of buzz. The first round type guys, obviously everyone's familiar with Ashton Genty, the Heisman runner up. Um, I don't think he's available at 24.
Be kind of a
A
stretch
lot
to think he drops that far, wouldn't it?
lot of mocks have him going to Dallas at 12, which I think just feels very Jerry Jonesy.
Yeah.
Um, but who knows? He's a guy where, broadly speaking, I have advocated for the trade back because the Vikings
Mhm.
have less draft capital than quite literally all 31 other teams, when considering the picks and the value of those picks. I think they need to move back and get more picks and just have more swings at this thing, when the draft is, we know historically, largely a crapshoot. So I think they should trade back. But I wrote an article a few weeks ago, like there are some guys who, if they're there at 24, you don't pass up on them just to trade back. I think Ashton Genty is one of those guys. I think Walter Nolan and maybe even Kenneth Grant are among those guys. Jade Barron. But yeah, Genty is unbelievable. One of the best running back prospects we've seen in a while. I don't know that he goes as high as like Bijan Robinson and Jameer Gibbs did, just because maybe there's some questions about he played at Boise State. Uh, the just some of the strength of the overall
Mhm.
running back class this year that might allow teams to wait. But yeah, Jetty's going to be really good. And then the other guys who are kind of in that back end of the first round conversation, Omarion Hampton from North Carolina, really really good player. Um, you've got Caleb Johnson from Iowa. A lot of guys that the Gophers fans, if they're watching, have seen up close this year. By the way, Max Rosemer, not Darius Taylor, Daniel Jackson going on Saturday as well, so that'll
Mhm.
be fun. But the Ohio State's got two of them. If you're watching the Buckeyes run to the national championship, Trevion Henderson is generally regarded as the better of the two, but Quinshon Judkins also a very good player. I mean, the list really just is Cam Scatterbo of Arizona State, Devin Neal of Kansas. I'm looking at the list here. There are so many guys. RJ Harvey, UCF, Trevor Etienne out of Georgia. There are a lot of dudes where if you don't take a running back early, and some of those first four names or so I talked about are really, really, really intriguing to where I would be okay with the Vikings taking one of them. I think I think I'd only maybe take Genty at 24, and then I'd look for like a Hampton or Henderson or Johnson if you trade back just a little bit. But
Mhm.
um, you can also wait, and you can almost certainly get a very intriguing running back with that 97th overall pick that they're getting, the comp pick for Kirk Cousins. So keep an eye on all those running backs, and we'll see which of those guys are going to run like in the 4.3s, low 4.4s, and maybe boost their stock.
And then lastly, the position group that I know Vikings fans froth at the mouth at every season because of the lack of good play at it throughout the past handful of years. Offensive linemen on Sunday. Who are the Vikings targets in that position group?
Yeah, I mean the Vikings are pretty set at tackle. We know with Christian Darrisaw and Brian O'Neill. Cam Robinson is not going to be back, but that's okay. He was a kind of 1 year fill in after Darrisaw got hurt. But it's the interior, and it's something I do think that you need to address in free agency. At least one starting caliber guard, maybe two. Maybe you even look to move on from Garrett Bradbury at center. I don't know that that creates another hole you got to fill, but it might be worth doing with just some of the struggles we've seen from Bradbury in pass protection. Um, so I'm looking, even if you, again, this is one that will be determined by what happens in free agency, but even if you do sign two or three starting level players, that doesn't necessarily rule out drafting one potentially early, because it's really all about getting the best player available and maximizing your value. I think a guy to watch who could be available in that range for the Vikings is Tyler Booker, the guard from Alabama, who just he's a stud. He's played left guard. You've got a lot of guys who have played tackle in college who maybe will move inside at the NFL for concerns about arm length or things like that. There's several of those in this year's class. But Tyler Booker is a guard through and through. He actually was teammates with JJ McCarthy for a year at IMG Academy in high school. So he's someone to keep an eye on. There's other guards, Donovan Jackson from Ohio State. He moved out to left tackle after I think Josh Simmons was their tackle who got hurt. But he's probably a guard. And then, I mean, later on, you've got guys like Tate Ratledge from Georgia, Jonas Savanea from Arizona. It's another good interior offensive line class. Gray Zabel from North Dakota State, somewhat local, was a guy who really rose at the Senior Bowl. And there's a bunch of others here as well. But yeah, that'll be fun to keep an eye on Sunday. It should be a good week. We'll hear from obviously, like we said, we'll hear from Kevin O'Connell, Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah on Tuesday, and then the on-field workouts starting on Thursday. So big week for the NFL, big week for the Vikings, and excited to follow it, and we'll be covering it all at Vikings on SI.
Absolutely. Good stuff. I'm looking forward to this week, one of my favorite weeks of the year. Just a ridiculous concept that has gone national and it gets a lot of national TV time, watching college prospects work out in shorts and t-shirts, and it gets ratings, and people love watching it because it provides excitement and hope for the future. And plenty to watch this week, plenty to cover. As Will said, go read all of our work at Vikings on SI. Also, Timberwolves, Twins, and Gophers on SI as well, covering it all for you. Hit subscribe on the channel, does help us out. Also notifies you every time we post a new video here on the channel. We'll talk to you Wednesday with another topic across Minnesota sports. Talk to you then.